Hey there guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing a history of the creation of Phantasy Star II. Now, I'm going to tell you my personal memories of this game. I had a Genesis growing up, despite the fact of me being 18, and most of my friends and people I knew had Xboxes and PlayStation 4s. I had a Genesis with about 40 games with it. Among these are Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3. I never had Ultimate. I didn't even know it existed till way later on. But Phantasy Star was always the game that I liked the most. Now, don't burn me at the stake when I say this, but I played Phantasy Star 3 way more than I did 2. But 2 was still pretty interesting, with sci-fi setting, which may seem a little weird because while my brother was playing The Witcher 3, I was playing this. But at the same time, this is coming from a kid who never saw a YouTube video till he's 16. And before I get into it, I hope you don't mind if I have most of this video of me grinding for my Phantasy Star II How to Beat series. So, mostly because I don't have anything else to use is the reason I'm doing this. But when it's appropriate, I will throw up something else for you guys to look at. Anyway, to the video. Now, in 1988, the release of the Mega Drive in Japan marked a new beginning for the company. After its previous console attempts, the SG-1000 at Master System. Now, I've never heard of the SG-1000 until I did research for this video. Don't know what it is. If any of you do know, please leave it in the comments below. And the Master System was essentially the 8-bit competitor from Nintendo. It had some interesting games on it, but really the only one I can think of off the top of my head was Phantasy Star and an Alex Kidd game. But they both failed to catch on. So the company decided, yeah, this failed, but screw it. We're going to go to 16-bit anyway. And released it, the Sega Genesis. And it was more powerful, and keep in mind, the Super Nintendo wasn't out at the time, so this console was way more powerful than the NES, which was still being done by Nintendo. An 8-bit versus 16-bit. Pretty simplistic. But they knew it wouldn't survive off flashy visuals alone. Wish some companies nowadays would realize this. It would need a solid offering of various titles and stories, whatever, to stray away from Nintendo's thrall. That made absolutely zero sense. I am so sorry. Long story short, they needed some good games to get people away from Nintendo. Got it? Good. Let's go. Anyway, it went back to its 8-bit catalog of other games like Alex Kidd, which was Sega's mascot. Let me put him up here. He was Sega's mascot before Sonic. He was basically Mario, but he was a kid. So they also brought back Phantasy Star, which was released on the Master System, and was, if I can double check, fairly certain it was its best-selling game. Okay, so I was gone for a bit, primarily due to me doing some research on the Master System, which, by the way, it kept thinking I was talking about the Genesis. Phantasy Star was actually the third best-selling Master System game. Alex Kidd in the Miracle World was the first. Anyway, so back to Phantasy Star. After the development team was immediately thrown on to making Phantasy Star 2 for the Genesis, as, like I said, Phantasy Star 1 was a fairly popular game. And many of the people responsible for the original hit returned, including designers Riko Koadama and Natsuo Oshimana. Yeah, these are Japanese names that I'm having a hard time pronouncing them. Sorry. Character designer Koto Hashirati and programmer Yucha Naki. Or Nikia, not. Okay, whatever N-A-K-A spells, okay? Together, they planned on fleshing out the futuristic world of Argo in much greater detail. Phantasy Star had wowed Master System owners with its clever mix of traditional fantasy elements, sleek and eye-catching sci-fi designs, and the sequel would make the place more emphasis on giving the sci-fi aspect of the sequel more of its own identity. Examples of where the magic were removed, renamed technique, and the dead characters were now cloned in a lab instead of being revived at a church. Weapons and armor were now gear and suits of carbon and titanium. The fantasy details were still present, but they were more subdued in favor of Argo's more futuristic side. Another crazy thing is the group was given 6 months to complete the game. And the schedule was, as Haisimada described it, oppressive. The challenges of such a short window and learning the new hardware meant they had to be several changes made to the original development plan because, according to Wikipedia, but not all sources, many say that it was originally going to be a Master System game, not Genesis. And to pop it all off, they put an entirely new guy on the monster designs and graphics. The guy's name was Tushu Yishidai. Japanese people, please don't burn me alive for misspelling your names. Who had just been hired to Sega as a graphic designer, and Phantasy Star II was his first project. These areas are much more complex than those of the first Phantasy Star, which are almost more work than Yoshidia could keep up with. He came up with all the design for the game's principal antagonist, Mother Brain, through what he called a combination of material image and computers. The all-powerful machine that maintains the climate of the planet Mota, green and lush, and schemes and plot throughout the game to destroy Rodolph and his companions. Yushi crafted the Mother Brain to be godlike, but also manipulated by the sinister Dark Force, the main antagonist of the first game. And unlike most games at the time, and some lesson we could probably learn from today, Mother Brain and the evil behind her were as much of a social commentary as they were video game plot devices. Phantasy Star II tackles the issue of our dependency on technology and the havoc it can wreak. Mother Brain Control provided the inhabitants of Algo with everything they needed, and no one questioned her restrictions such as the prohibition of space travel or making the oceans off limits. Humans were the invasive species that had caused Algo's problems, and they had become too complacent and weak to take action when Mother Brain lost control. Yeah, this is starting to sound like our world. Players are forced to work within that reality. One must keep in mind that Phantasy Star II was released in 1989, and such themes are not commonplace for console video games. The concept of a utopia that was too perfect and manipulated by cosmic evil was still pretty new. And one of the craziest things they had to do for the sequel was actually to change the 3D dungeons. Players often loved and hated, that's me when I played Phantasy Star 1, or I didn't really play Phantasy Star 1 that much, but I did play it on my Switch, getting lost in the multi-floor dungeons that filled the game. There are many requests that included the 3D perspective for the sequel. Unfortunately, it was not possible to do so, given the memory constraints of the new machine. Funny story, that's also why there's no backgrounds in the combat, because of memory restrictions. Keep in mind, this is before our fancy computers, where games are very unrestricted and you can do basically whatever the hell you want. That's probably a bad thing, come to think of it. And it was not... Kodama believed that to create a convincing 3D effect on the Genesis, rotating floors and other features would have consumed too much memory. Nuku wanted to continue the 3D dungeons, but he knew that might be possible to do so with the confines of the 6 megabit cartridge. Could you imagine someone today trying to make a game on a 6 megabit cartridge? Yeah, The Last of Us wouldn't fit in that. Another problem is there simply wasn't enough time. The design team had been working on the story for several months, but the time the actual artwork and programming done, less than 3 months remain until release. So, yeah, in other words, that should sum it up. But Hoshiya wasn't fazed by the decision to move 3D dungeons, arguing they were never the essence of what Phantasy Star truly was. Moreover, he considered them to be contribute to the game's overall difficulty. Being able to save your game in the dungeons led to a huge problem. He contended to the same in a 1993 interview as Kodama. If you were always deep in a dungeon and very close to death after a battle, you could save your game, but in doing so, you'd always start out in that weakened state, and if you encounter an enemy, you would never win. Therefore, getting trapped in a dungeon forever. It was especially tragic if it happened in the later part of the game. With tears in your eyes, you'd have no choice but to start a new game. He may have been right, and any Phantasy Star player who defeated Lassic at the end and lacked an acorn or the 2 technique points needed to fly back to town will remember the game is essentially broken, and there was no other recourse but to start over. So an overhead view was instead used for the dungeons, and they were designed by Sega's new employee, possibly Jin or Wusukami, based on the gamographics of the design involved. Apparently, the young man was a bit overzealous in his efforts to impress his new bosses, and the designs are much more complex than the team had planned. Uku wasn't too fond of the large and difficult designs, but didn't want all the new designers' work to be shelved, so she reluctantly decided to include them. Hoshiki felt the designs shifted the focus of the dungeons, and the story made the second half of the game unbalanced. Yeah. I personally kind of wish they did shelf them, because if you watch my How to Beat series, these dungeons are a mess. I mean, let me just throw a few of them up here so you can see the bull crap these things are. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Yeah, I think they should have probably toned it down a little bit. And naturally, after the game was released in 1998, I think I said that right, or was it 1998? Let me double check that. 1988, sorry. No, 1998, sorry. Of course, it got an American release. But here's the funny thing. This is the Japanese cover art. Okay? This is the American cover art. What in the bloody heck? Could be worse, right? Another important thing to point out that Phantasy Star II did, and big spoiler alerts ahead, is that Neely dies. She was the first RPG character to die at some point in the game. Now, most people remember Final Fantasy VII for doing this, but no, Phantasy Star II beat it by almost a decade. Neely dies at the death of her non-human counterpart, Neely Fist, or Neely First, the game's first boss battle. Came in a major turning point in the story. The party explores the Moda Biosystem Lab to discover the reasons for recent biomonster outbreak. At the end of their investigation into the lab, they found another non-human called Neely Fist, who reveals that she is responsible for the outbreak. Furthermore, the party discovers that Neely Fist and Neely are two halves of the same being, one good, one evil, essentially yin and yang. After some dialogue, the two do battle, and Neely is killed. The combat is a particularly sad event, and it feels a looming sense of dread during the entire affair. At least according to this site, that is. And that battle can have no positive outcome. The players seek revenge and fight Neely Fist, which makes it harder now that the party is missing a member. So, yeah. Square and PlayStation may be able to do it better due to the CD-ROM cartridges and the cutscenes and all that, but this game did it first, and that earned some credit there. And lastly, is Phantasy Star a good game? Well, yeah. Like I said, I didn't play this game until 20 years later, and I was content with it. I mean, keep in mind, when I heard RPG, the first one I ever saw was The Witcher. My brother was playing. So when I decided to pop in my Phantasy Star, it was a bit of a shocker to me, but holy crap, is it not an amazing game? Like I said, I'm also doing a How to Beat on my channel. So I'd really appreciate if you look that up. And if there's anything I can do to improve these videos, please leave a comment down below, as I'm still pretty new to this whole thing. Like I said, I have never had even seen a YouTube video until I was 16 years old. Anyway, also, I just love to point out that despite this game being originally a Genesis title, you can get it on the Game Boy Advance and even Steam for 99 cents, which is a fairly good deal seeing what you're getting. Anyway, Troy Schultz, out.